You're watching WHO TV 13 Des Moines, your 24-hour news source. And now, John Bachman, Kim Kerrigan, Rick Silvestrini with sports, and meteorologist Gary Amble with tomorrow's forecast. This is Newscenter 13 at 10.
I've never seen a city that's so trashed in my life. It is like it's like the aftermath of World War III.
Former hostages arrive in the U.S. with stories to tell. Good evening. I'm Lori Grove sitting in for Kim Kerrigan.
156 former hostages arrived at Andrews Air Force Base late this afternoon. Up until yesterday, all of them were either in hiding or were held captive in Kuwait. But all that's behind them now. The group gained their freedom aboard a 747 jumbo jet chartered by the U.S. government. The former hostages were greeted by relatives, reporters, and military officials. A hostage with Iowa ties is among this group. Lawrence Velakoop, you can see here, carrying a fellow hostage down the steps. Lawrence, whose wife Randy hails from Jefferson, was a diplomat in Kuwait. One hostage who took refuge in the United States Embassy in Kuwait talks now of looting and devastation by the Iraqi troops.
Every fifth house along the major roads, I swear, every fifth house has been turned into a fortress. It's been bricked up, bolted up with little peepholes. The military occupies a tremendous... You just can't go anywhere without encountering military people.
The city's just changed. It's not the same. The Iraqi influence has permeated everything, and the freedom that we so take for granted as Americans is no longer there.
U.S. officials say a second plane chartered by the Pentagon will evacuate more Americans from Iraq and Kuwait on Tuesday. An Iraqi airliner is en route to London at this hour with 384 Westerners on board. There are a few Americans on this plane, and there are still about 750 Americans in Iraq and Kuwait, and they expect their flights to freedom to take place within days.
More Iowa troops will be leaving soon to take part in Operation Desert Shield. The 875th Replacement Detachment based at Fort Dodge received orders today to stand by for active duty. No word on when they will be deployed or to where.
The homecoming celebration continues tonight for former hostage Charles Keegan. His first full day of freedom in Iowa came on his daughter Kathy's birthday. And the family was out celebrating in West Des Moines tonight, one of the few chances to relax since Keegan's return to Iowa from his captivity near Baghdad. Keegan says it's likely that he'll stay in the United States rather than continue to globetrot as an investment consultant. Keegan, of course, was one of the first 23 former hostages allowed to leave Iraq Saturday after Saddam Hussein announced his intentions to free them all. But for a time, it appeared the flight was in jeopardy. Newscenter 13 Scott Pope was the only reporter on board the flight to freedom, and tonight begins a special series of reports on the historic release of Americans held against their will by Saddam Hussein.
John, the flight was, of course, the first to carry Americans to freedom after Saddam's announcement this past week. But the two men who brought the charter jetliner to Baghdad to pick up the hostages say last-minute meddling by officials at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad angered Iraqi officials to the point where the flight was almost canceled. Former Texas Governor John Connally and Texas oil magnate Oscar Wyatt were hoping to bring home more than 100 hostages. Connally met personally with Saddam Hussein and convinced him that holding Americans hostage was not in his best interest.
We made the point that he was being portrayed as a man lacking total in human compassion and concern, and that we thought a total release of the hostages by Christmas would serve his purposes, would serve the interest of humanity.
As late as 6 hours before the 707 was scheduled to leave Baghdad, a crisis developed. Connally says a conflict between Assistant U.S. Ambassador Joe Wilson and the Iraqi government prevented more hostages from leaving.
Once the State Department got involved in it, then it became a government-to-government problem, and you inherit all of the problems that exist between the two governments, and we didn't want that.
The negotiations had broken down, and Connally was told to take the 23 Americans he had and get them out while he still could. Fortunately, Charles Keegan was one of them. There was complete silence on board the jet as we pulled away from the airport terminal. But that silence was broken when the wheels lifted off the runway.
Yeah!
For Oscar Wyatt, the man who had put up the money for the chartered flight to freedom, the outcome was bittersweet.
Whatever factor we played, be it little or great, it makes it fairly simple to get all of our American people out of Iraq. And we hope that'll be a stimulus for peace.
Tomorrow night, the economic sanctions imposed by the UN. Its effects are being felt all over the Middle East, especially in Jordan, a country that is paying a tremendous price for the economic stranglehold on Iraq. That's coming up tomorrow night on the news at 10.
You were saying that Oscar Wyatt had an interesting announcement on board that plane.
He did tell us all once we got airborne that Saddam Hussein had actually paid for all the jet fuel to fly them to Ireland and eventually home, $25,000 worth of jet fuel, waived all the landing fees at the Iraq airport, and actually offered to cater food onto the plane. He said he just wanted to know, the hostages to know, that that's what Saddam Hussein had offered them in their flight to freedom, that he wasn't such an all bad guy.
The Iraqi people themselves and their feelings about Americans?
Very friendly. The ones that we talked to that could speak English, not very many of them could, made a point of telling me every time I talked to them, we don't want war, we don't want to fight the United States, we want a peaceful solution to this. And I think that was encouraging to all of us who were there. I don't know if it will come about, but it was encouraging.
Much better to talk to you here than in Baghdad.
Yeah, from 7,000 miles away, isn't it?
It's great to have you back. Thank you much.
A stretch of Fluor Drive will provide a tribute to those serving in the Persian Gulf. The City Council has approved an avenue of ribbons along Fluor. Businesses along the route are being asked to join in the effort. Some companies have already decided to donate the red, white, and blue ribbon. Volunteers will start putting it up in just a few days.
When Newscenter 13 returns, a solemn reminder the holidays will bring pain to thousands